Good day, everybody. Welcome to Kerapac, a minimalist guide. That can also be called an iron guide, since this is an iron account. First things first, I'm going to cover a lot of topics in this video, so everything is time-stamped. If you look in the video description and you're curious about some parts of this more than others, if you've already kind of played around with Kerapac and you're just struggling on something in particular, like Phase 4, you can bounce around. Otherwise, I'll cover as much as I can to help players who are learning Kerapac or are just otherwise very low DPS at this stage in their account. I am going to go over gear and other recommendations for things that bump up your DPS, but since there's a wide variety of things you can do to help in that context, I'm going to save that for later. And the first thing I'm going to discuss is the actual mechanics of the Kerapac fight. This, if you're not familiar with or if you're not dealing with them properly, can really mess you up and hurt your kill times and survivability more than gear. The first thing to know is that as far as auto attacks, Kerapac only uses magic and he hits with medium strong hits. They'll hit you for over 1,000, but if you're deflecting magic and or using animate dead, they're pretty negligible compared to the other mechanics. His first real mechanic occurs after about 2 or 3 auto attacks into the fight, and it is the lightning line. Let me look up what it's called actually. It's a lightning line or something, but there's also a lightning wall, so it's confusing. Shatter is what the wiki says that this mechanic is called, which, whatever. So he says he'll tear right through you, and then you have a few seconds to handle it one of 2 ways. The best way to handle it is by standing right underneath him. This way the mechanic just doesn't fire off at all. Now if you mess up, or if you for some reason want to deal with it otherwise, you have to use Anticipate before this, otherwise he will stun you regardless of where you are. And then in the direction that you're facing, he will kind of send out like a line of lightning, which is why I called it that in the first place. And that does steady magic damage to you per tick. If you're deflecting from it and all that, it won't do too much, and it's pretty negligible, but if he makes this little lightning line, you'll have to deal with it in the other phases, so it's much, much better to just stand on top of him so he doesn't do that. This is especially relevant once you start doing hard mode, because that mechanic is a whole different thing to deal with there. Some number of auto attacks later, he will do his next mechanic, which is called the Jumping Slam. If you don't yet have the enriched Shadow Pontifex ring with 1,000 jazz anima added to it, it's extra important that you take care of this mechanic and dodge the hit. Basically, if you don't know already, adding 1,000 jazz anima to that ring makes it so that this mechanic cannot stun you, although it'll still damage you. So what he does is he jumps up in the air, and he will slam down on you, and he'll do this 3 times. When he slams down on you, he'll stay there and deal a lot of melee damage to you every single tick. So you can deal with that a few ways as well. For the purposes of this guide, I'll show you the most beginner way to deal with it. The most beginner way to deal with this, to dodge it completely, is to use Surge or Escape with the right timing to escape the area before he slams down. If you do it successfully, your timer, your reset for Surge or Escape will be reset. The timing for this is as follows. So you'll see when he jumps up, his wings kind of go down. When his wings start going up, that's when you Surge or Escape away. One little note on dealing with this, I prefer to use Escape whenever possible because for my purposes here I'm using dual-wielded mage, and the attack range of these things is short, so if you Surge away, you'll have to re-click Kerapac to target him and attack him again, which is a little bit annoying. If you Escape, since you travel less distance with Escape compared to Surge, you'll re-auto attack him. If you're using a Noxious Longbow or something with a longer attack range, you can Surge and still re-auto attack him again. Just a minor note there. One thing to note about this is that this, because of the way the phases work, if you're not familiar, every single phase you will deal with an echo of whatever you just dealt with in the previous phase. So what that means is, in phase 1, wherever a Kerapac jumps, in phase 2 and phase 3 there will be an echo of him that does the same thing. So it's kind of in your interest to be aware of where he's jumping and contain the area that he's jumping to as much as possible. I like to make him jump in the same places every phase, which means that at the beginning of every phase I'm standing in the same spot and I'm doing the same Surge, Escape, Surge, Escape. I'm not going to go into detail on the other way to handle the Jumping Slam because it's not a very beginner move at all and not for anybody with low DPS, but It's worth covering anyways, or at least mentioning. The other strategy is to, well, you have to have the Pontifex ring with 1,000 jazz anima so that you don't get stunned. But basically you switch to protect melee, you sit there instead of dodging it, and you just let Kerapac sit there, doing minimal melee damage to you for a while you just hit him and DPS him. This helps if you want to avoid the lightning wall mechanic by just delaying him from doing that, because the longer he sits there, he'll sit there forever dealing melee damage to you if he jumping slams on you and you don't move, just as long as you're alive and don't die. So what some players like to do is kind of do that at least for 1 or 2 jumping slams, and then maybe dodge the last one and soul split back the health that you lost. This does work much better if you have the devoted perk or enhanced devoted. The perk specifically, those will fire off because the devoted perk will not work. If you try it, he'll just make fun of you and mock you while you do that and hit you anyways with melee. So if you want to try that, I'm not gonna, like I said, no details here, but just a thought once you get more comfortable with Kerapac. The third mechanic you'll see after a few more auto attacks after the jumping slam is the actual lightning walls. This mechanic does get progressively worse per phase, but here's the gist. Kerapac slams down his staff, and then a wall of lightning spawns at random on one of the sides of the arena and just moves across the whole arena to the other side. If you stand in this lightning wall, you will get hit for up to 1,600 or so magic damage per tick. I think with Animate Dead it's around 2,000. And it can hurt you a lot, especially if you don't know how to deal with it properly. So if you do get the lightning wall mechanic, by which I mean if your DPS is high enough, you can phase Kerapac before he even spawns the lightning wall, which is the most ideal way to do this. But if your DPS sucks, which is why you're watching this video, the best way to deal with the lightning wall is to surge through it. That way, honestly, the hitbox of the lightning wall is super busted, so you might take damage anyways. Like, you might take a hit, but most of the time if you surge through it, you won't take any damage. Now, you might see a few times, I have some dumb tricks to deal with this here, and it leads into another mechanic that I'll explain later, but for example, if let's say you just drop the sunshine like I do often, and the lightning wall is coming, and it's really inconvenient to surge or escape out of the way, I will sometimes just eat it and kind of run through the lightning manually. So it's up to you if it's worth taking the hit because you've put down a badly timed sunshine. It's up to you if you think you can heal back from it. It won't really affect your kill times and damage output much. Actually, the less moving around you do, the faster you'll kill him, so take that into consideration. After this, and after a few more auto attacks, everything repeats. So he'll start over again with Shatter, the lightning line, auto attacks, jumping slams, auto attacks, lightning wall. So now I want to move into general strategies, because what kills a lot of players, maybe not literally, but just in terms of kill time, is the lightning wall mechanic. Like I mentioned, if your DPS is high enough, like very, very high, you can skip that entirely and phase Kerapac. What I mean by that is that every time you get him to 50,000 HP, for the first 3 phases, he will phase and all the mechanics start over. But if you're not there, dealing with the lightning walls sucks the most, because especially as the phases go on, there's 1 lightning wall per phase. So phase 2 has 2 lightning walls and phase 3 has 3 lightning walls. And you will spend a lot more time running around and dodging those. So I'm going to explain the next mechanic that I want to talk about too, because it helps to deal with this sometimes. And that next mechanic is Time Warp. So this uses the action button, and it pops up after you get past Kerapac's first phase. So after you get him to 50,000 HP and he heals himself, you'll have access to this Time Warp button. You can use it, and it has a reset of, maybe I'll look it up, but it seems like about 45 seconds. And basically, if you don't know already, it takes a snapshot of where you are, so your health, prayer points, adrenaline, ability cooldown, and physical position. It takes a snapshot, and then in 10 seconds, it reverts you back to that snapshot. There are a lot of things you can do with this, and there are going to be a lot of players with a lot of opinions. In my personal opinion, in my case, I don't bother getting too sweaty with it. I kind of use it as it is convenient, and I don't... I've played around with it a bit, and I've tried some, like, you know, more intensive strategy and more thoughtful strategy with better timing and all that, and it maybe speeds up my kills by like 15 seconds if I try extra hard. So I'm only going to tell you the ways that I've used Time Warp that I think are convenient, kind of low effort, but still have a good amount of benefit. So The first thing I do often with Time Warp is try to time my Sunshine. And by the way, if you're not used to ability and adrenaline management yet, take Sunshine or Death Swiftness off of your ability bar, and definitely take Berserk off there if you're meleeing. I try to use Time Warp right before I drop a Sunshine. This is because you fire off Time Warp, you drop a Sunshine, and then 10 seconds later you get your full adrenaline bar back, and you can drop Sunshine again immediately. So depending on the situation, because it's not always a good idea to use Sunshine or Death Swiftness, depending on what stage of his mechanics he's on. I'll either use it and just save it, so I can use Sunshine or Death Swiftness again in under a minute, or just immediately blast him with an Omnipower or something for extra damage. So, up to you. In Phase 4 that I'll go over, this becomes really important actually, to kind of manage this better, but that's one handy use. The other more dumb use that I found for this, it by no means really helps you speed up your kills or help you very much in this way, but it has to do with the lightning walls if you get there. So starting in Phase 2, and really I only recommend this for Phase 2 because you will not want to use this action button for Phase 3. You want to save it. For Phase 2 lightning walls, what I try to do is stand in the middle, and right before the lightning walls hit me, rather than dodging them, I try to drop a I try to hit the Time Warp button and drop a Sunshine. Let the lightning walls hit me and do all their damage, and then just wait 10 seconds to be healed back to full. I do this because it avoids running around and the time wasting that the lightning wall mechanic causes in that way, which in my experience is one of the things that slows down kill times the most. So I don't like to run around during the lightning walls. As if I can help it, I'll just drop a Sunshine and eat the damage, and then heal it back with Time Warp. So if you have trouble with the lightning walls, that's one way to deal with them. That's not so bad in my opinion. Alright, now that we've covered all the phases and the mechanics and the Time Warp, I want to talk about Phase 4 because I imagine this is where a lot of players that are new to Kerapac are struggling, especially if your DPS isn't high, because Phase 4 is a defensives and DPS check all at the same time. You need to leverage as many defenses as possible and also kill him quickly so he doesn't kill you quickly, because Kerapac actually gains stacks during Phase 4 every time he attacks you, and every time he attacks you, his next attacks will do a bit more damage, so he hurts you harder and harder as Phase 4 goes on. If you don't know yet, he has 75,000 HP during Phase 4. And then after you kill him, you're done. So, at the start of Phase 4, I try to have full adrenaline, or as close to full adrenaline as possible. And you will need to leverage Time Warp if your DPS sucks, like mine does here. So, there are a few ways to go about it. What I prefer the most is to have full adrenaline bar, which means no dropping Sunshines or ultimates during like the lightning of Phase 3. I try to have full adrenaline, hit the Time Warp, and then drop a Sunshine or Death Swiftness if you're ranging. You'll see here in some kills that I try to drop Devotion and Protect from Magic, and then Sunshine. I later realized that it's totally unnecessary because as long as you can survive 10 seconds for the Time Warp to work and bring you back, you'll just heal to full health anyways. So ignore my devoting there. If you have full adrenaline, just do Death Swiftness or Sunshine, hit the action button, or sorry, the Time Warp button, and then after 10 seconds, when you get your adrenaline back, then you use Devotion. If your DPS is mediocre, you can kill him by the time that Devotion runs out. If your DPS is even lower, you'll need another defensive ability such as... Oops, I forgot what it's called. Debilitate, that's what it's called. You can use Debilitate if you still need a little bit more time to kill him after your Devotion runs out. If your adrenaline is not full because you did what I did in some of these kills and accidentally dropped an ultimate right before Phase 4, make sure you have at least 50% adrenaline, hit the action button, and then use Devotion. That way when the Time Warp brings you back, you can use Devotion a second time, so you get 2 full Devotions worth of 0 damage if you're protecting from magic, and then use Debilitate for the extra time that you need. It is very tempting when the Time Warp gives you back your full adrenaline to use an Omnipower or another ultimate ability like that. Please don't if you take a while to kill him. I did that a few times and I just end up eating through the last phase here, so it's tempting, but don't do it unless you can kill him very quickly. So next I want to cover gear and other DPS helpers that can help either like mid-level accounts or iron accounts. There is some disparity there. This is an iron account like I mentioned, so range is essentially off the table since the only high-level range weapons like Noxious Longbow, Decimation, Ascension Crossbows, even Wyvern Crossbow are really hard to Ironman if you are mid-level account anyways. So if you're not an Iron, range might be preferable because there are at this point a lot of arrows you can buy, such as Bic arrows or Stalker arrows are awesome. Sorry, Splintering arrows are amazing if you have Greater Dazing Shot, which you should. Or of course Ascension Crossbows with Beckermanna Bolts help a lot. A little bit more expensive, but you can do it if you can just buy those. In that case, you should be able to DPS much easier than I can here, and maybe even skip the lightning wall. If you want to use magic because you're an iron or because you're taking too much damage and you want to leverage Animate Dead, totally doable. You'll notice here I do have a Scripture of Jazz because this iron got lucky and I got it within a few kills of my first kills of Kerapac. I don't have Greater Concentrated Blast yet, although I did get it on this Slayer task. But anyways, I don't have that yet, so it's extra crappy. If you're non-iron, definitely buy Greater Concentrated Blast if you're using dual-wield magic weapons. Otherwise, if you're using a Noxious Staff, don't worry about it yet. And I would recommend Animate Dead and Magic only if you're just taking too much damage ranging and you need to get used to this a little bit more first. On that note, for getting warmed up to this, aura-wise, Vampirism is the most helpful when you're first getting used to Kerapac. Afterwards, I recommend a DPS aura, like the war auras that, like Berserker, Maniacal, or the Reckless, I think for range. Those are the ones that up your damage and accuracy by 10%, but also reduce your damage and, reduce your defense and damage taken. Yeah, what am I saying? They increase your damage taken by 15% and reduce your damage by 15%. So use those once you're more comfortable with taking more damage. In the meantime, you can use something like Penance Aura if you want to wean off of Vampirism and just save some prayer points. I do have an Amulet of Souls here, and I'm going to say 95 prayer is mandatory for having a good time at Kerapac. There are very appropriate times to soul split. You'll actually notice that for a lot of the later kills here, I'm soul splitting pretty much the whole time because I can deal with it. But at first you can flick between Deflect Magic and soul split. Anyways, an Amulet of Souls is not required, but is a big help, especially for soul splitting and just because deflecting damage is really important for Kerapac, and it helps to have Deflect from Magic protect you from 60% rather than 50%, especially in Phase 4. Aside from that, all the best boosts you can get. If you can afford a Scripture of When, definitely buy that, or get that as an iron. Otherwise, Jazz is kind of mediocre as a Scripture. And that's about it for gear. Unless you're using Animate Dead, of course, favor Power Armor for a little bit more damage. Other little bonuses include Weapon Poison, definitely use that, that'll help. If you can afford Cinderbanes and have those, even better. Use those with any gear setup. And your best combat summoning familiars. In my case, a Geyser Titan is the best I can do here, but ideally if you can pull off a Ripper Demon with scrolls, that will help a lot, and that's one of the main things on my main account that helps me skip the Lightning Wall phase, because that Ripper Demon does crazy damage. Otherwise, if it's too expensive or if you're not there, a Steel Titan or an Iron Titan is the next best thing, as long as you are spamming special scrolls as often as possible. As for general strategies to improve your DPS and kill times, there's a lot you can do that is irrespective of what level of gear you have or abilities or summoning familiar or whatever. And I have a few pointers from my little experience doing this on a very limited Ironman account. So firstly, I recommend managing your adrenaline really well. If you aren't really used to doing that or don't like doing that yet, Kerapac will teach you, even in normal mode. Hard mode is much more intense with it, but even in normal mode it pays to be aware of your adrenaline and handle it properly. So there are good and bad times to drop Sunshine or Death Swiftness. The best time, in my opinion, to use those is immediately after the Lightning Wall, or let's say after you're clear of the Lightning Walls, because you'll have the most amount of time to stand still and just sit there, and you'll only have to deal with this Shatter Lightning Line mechanic, and you'll be standing in more or less the same place. Especially if you can combine it with the Time Rift right before you Sunshine or Death Swiftness, you can get all your adrenaline back very nicely. For beginners especially, I recommend having a adrenaline gain forward rotation bar. As you can see in mine, I actually have Concentrated Blast and Fire Breath first before any adrenaline consuming. abilities. This is just to make sure that in any situation I have as much adrenaline as I possibly need. If you want to bother with adrenaline potions, yuck, or other ways of adrenaline management, or you're just more comfortable, you can shift your revolution bar to be a little bit more DPS-y and aggressive. But for starters, I recommend just having a lot of basic abilities up front to gain adrenaline. I also recommend having a good number of basic abilities on hotkeys. For example, I have Chain as a kind of just in case I need more adrenaline, especially right before phase 4 or something. If your adrenaline bar is not quite full, but you want it to be, you can force a few basic abilities to just get it there before you time warp in Sunshine or Death Swiftness. So that about sums up this guide. I hope it helps everybody. This is an updated version of a guide I made for Kerapac a while ago. I've since done a lot more Kerapac kills, and on my main account I can just blast through him at this point in like 2-minute kills, and coming back to an Ironman account and struggling with Kerapac all over again has led me to a lot of inspiration to make this video, so I hope it helps everybody else that is struggling with this as well. If you want to see more content like this, please consider liking this video and subscribing. It helps me to grow my channel a lot. And thank you for making it all the way to the end, and I'll catch you in the next one.